It began with something so innocent, so ordinary, I almost didn't notice it at first. A knock on the front door. A smile. A handshake. A polite exchange between strangers. He was new. A tenant moving into the unit we rented out behind our home. Mid-20s if that. Tall, lean, with a quiet strength in the way he moved. His eyes were dark, steady, and calm, like he saw the world differently. My husband walked him through the lease terms, friendly as ever, while I stood off to the side, offering the occasional nod and smile. But something about him made the air feel different. He didn't speak much, didn't try to charm anyone. Yet, his presence filled the room in a way I couldn't quite explain. I told myself it was just a harmless observation. Passing admiration. He was attractive, sure, but that was all it was. Or so I thought. Days went by. Then weeks. And each time I saw him, whether he was coming back from a jog, or tending to something near his unit, I felt something stir. Something small but persistent. First it was the casual greetings. A nod. A brief hello. Then the moments began to stretch. A few seconds longer. A passing conversation about the weather, his job, or the plants he'd started lining up near his door. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing that crossed a line. But still, I started to notice myself waiting for those moments. I'd linger by the window just a little longer when I heard movement outside. I found excuses to be in the garden when I knew he'd be coming by. It wasn't lust, not exactly. It was the warmth he brought into the space. The spark he carried that reminded me of something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. My husband had been working late hours for years. Exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. When he came home, he barely looked at me anymore. Our conversations had dwindled into logistical exchanges. What to pick up from the store, whose turn it was to take out the trash. The affection was there, but it felt hollow. Like muscle memory. Habit. I still loved him. That wasn't the issue. But I had grown used to a kind of quiet sorrow. A deep loneliness I had never dared to name. And now suddenly, in the middle of all that numbness, someone else was making me feel seen. One night, my husband was working late again. The house was quiet. I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped outside to breathe. The light from the tenant's unit glowed softly in the dark. His door was slightly open, music playing inside. Something mellow and smooth, like a whisper. I wasn't planning to go over. I really wasn't. But my feet moved anyway. I paused by the door, unsure, just as he looked up and saw me. "Can't sleep?" he asked, voice low, calm. I hesitated, wine glass in hand, then offered a half smile. Something like that. He moved aside without saying anything more, and I stepped inside. We talked. For hours. About nothing and everything. I found myself laughing at his stories, sharing pieces of myself I hadn't dusted off in years. Childhood dreams. Silly college memories. Even parts of my marriage. The parts that didn't sparkle anymore. He listened, really listened. Not the way people pretend to, just waiting for their turn to speak. No. He was fully present. His attention made me feel like I mattered again. By the time I left his place that night, the air around me felt electric. My cheeks were flushed, my pulse unsteady. It had been just a conversation. But my body told a different story. Something inside me had awakened, and it wasn't going back to sleep. From that night forward, everything changed. I started paying more attention to how I looked. I dusted off my favorite dresses, put on lipstick again. Not for him, or so I told myself, but because I missed feeling like a woman. He noticed. Of course he did. I could see it in the way his eyes lingered a little longer, in the subtle curve of his lips when he smiled. And I didn't look away. I welcomed it. One afternoon I came back from the store, juggling too many grocery bags. As I struggled with the door, I heard his voice behind me, casual but knowing. "Need some help?" I didn't need it, but I let him help anyway. He followed me inside, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. We stood there, close but not touching, and yet the tension was thick enough to taste. He asked if I cooked often. I shrugged and said only when there's someone to cook for. His eyes flickered just for a second, like he was piecing something together. Then he asked about my husband, whether he was gone a lot. I nodded. That was all I could manage. I should have ended the conversation there. Should have thanked him and showed him out. But I didn't. Instead, I reached for another wine glass. Poured two. He hesitated. Just a breath. Then took it, our fingers brushing for a moment that sent a jolt through me. We sat and talked and sipped. And little by little, the space between us disappeared. A glance. A smile. A brush of his hand near mine. Then, a drop of wine slid from the corner of my lip. He reached out slowly and wiped it with his thumb, and left it there just a moment too long. I didn't move. Neither did he. It was as if time had slowed, holding its breath. He whispered, "I should go." I nodded, but we stayed frozen, until finally he stepped away. The door closed behind him, and I stood there, lips parted, heart racing, wondering what I had just allowed to happen. But it didn't end. That night turned into a pattern. A ritual. Stolen hours when the house was empty. Glances exchanged in passing that burned hotter than fire. I told myself I'd stop. I told myself I had to. But I couldn't. He became an addiction. Not just his body, but the way he saw me. The way he listened. The way he wanted me. And in return, I gave him all the pieces of myself I'd long forgotten existed.